there! If you just stumbled upon my video, then welcome to my channel and thank you so much for taking a look. And if you already know who I am, well then I'm very grateful for your continuous support. So today we're gonna be painting grapes. So full class of this painting is on my Patreon, that's where I teach monthly. And right now I will show you the process we took to paint it. So I started by mixing up the colors for the bloom, so that's the layer underneath all those red patches on the grape. I tried to use my limited palette as always and mix with my limited palette all the mixes. So I chose a few primary colors and then I tried to stick with them so that the painting is unified and coherent. So I made a few mixes, a little bit more blue, the other one's a little bit more pink, a little bit more purple, and so I'm gonna paint the bloom layer first. And before I start to paint, I remove the excess graphite off my watercolor paper, just with a little bit of kneadable eraser. And I start doing that by using wet on wet technique, meaning I wet the paper first with clean water and then I apply color on that damp surface. It gives you a really nice smooth spread and you can easily lift all the highlights, just as I'm doing right now. I'm lifting some color off the middle of the grape and around the edges for reflective light. And I'm starting quite light because that bloom is very delicate and very light and I don't want to go too dark just yet. But of course when you paint your midtones, it's very hard to know whether they are right without the dark tones. So once we lay down the darkest tones, then we will see whether the midtones are right or not. So we need a contrast in order to see.
I could give you more than half of me.
After the first layers, it's good to remove your pencil line that you're not gonna need anymore because some watercolors can make pencil marks permanent and we don't want that. And so once the colors dried, I noticed that they're definitely too light, so I needed to darken them, and I gave a second layer of wet on wet for the bloom color. It's always better to start lighter than darker because it's much harder to go lighter in watercolors, so no rush. So once the bloom color is done, now I'm mixing up some colors for those red patches. And again with my limited palette I mix few different shades of red and purple. And I continue my painting with wet on wet technique still because I want those really soft, nice blooms. Not too much water though, because I don't want those marks spread too far. Starting with my lighter color, then I'm adding some darker one, and always lift off highlights. So once I completed the main patches of those grapes, now I take my smaller brush and I focus on more finer details. And I'm adding all the little scratches and marks and dots and just really trying to capture everything that those grapes been through.
Since I ran into you, do you need a picture? Well, like it's old. It's hard to take one when your iPhone's full. Who's gonna save you? Who's gonna make you not blue?
So now with all my darker tones and all the finer detail in place, I see that the bloom color has faded and in contrast to the darker tones are too light. So I water down my mixes and I glaze over. And that serves me, one, for darkening the bloom color, and two, by glazing over those marks and fine detail, it softens them and makes it a little bit more realistic and natural.
Rolling over all the dividing themes. Are you still listening?
In watercolors, if you want to achieve the luminosity and transparency and vibrancy, you have to work in those really watery, transparent watercolor mixes and just layering them over and over again until you achieve the saturation. But just something about layering those transparent watercolors really makes them luminous, just as you would imagine a stained glass, so that those transparent watercolors allow for the paper to shine through. And now I remove a little bit of paint from few parts, just at the tips of the grape. And there are a few little marks that I'm using this little tool just to scrape off the paint of the paper.
And I see that love rolling over. You call me back to the
So the grape part is over, and now all is left to do to paint in this little stem. So using the same pigments I use for mixing my colors for grapes, I mix up a little bit of green and brown. And you can see how using the same pigments but changing the amount of each, you can create different shades of colors.
I rise a child again. Wake up a wild wind takes me there. I rise a child again. Wake up a wild wind takes me there. Slow fall into the Indian Sea, where the cold and the hot meet, and the powers that be.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you do, please subscribe and like the video. I'll see you in the future. Bye.
I wake up a wild wind takes me there.